This story is from 1999. I was 20 years old. My girlfriend of 5 months had just closed the door to the bathroom with a pregnancy test. And I was, being that age, I was going to college at UND up in Grand Forks. I was changing oil at a quick lube at a car dealership down there. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to, just have a typical college lifestyle. So we were living in this 600 square foot kind of postage stamp of a house on an alley that was intended to be where the garage would go for a typical early 1900s house. I was living there with my sister, and again, my girlfriend is in the bathroom, and I'm standing outside. We had gone through all the paperwork about, how to take this test, and she didn't want to pee in front of me, which was fine. And so her name's Mindy. Mindy and I had started dating because a mutual friend of ours had moved out to Colorado Springs. And this friend of ours called her up and said, "Hey, will you call up DJ? He just had a really tough breakup. I'm worried about him. Will you just check in with him and see if he's doing okay?" And so I'm at my job at the Quick Lube. I was the guy that would write up your tickets when you bring your car in for an oil change. And I get this call, and they say, "DJ, you have a phone call." I pick it up, and a voice on the other end, "Hey, this is Mindy from high school. Do you remember me?" Because we hadn't hung out. We were just mutual friends. We hadn't spent much time together. I said, Mindy Hauger? Yeah, okay. I was just wondering, do you want to go to a party this Saturday and hang out? Not a date or anything, but just, get together. I said, yeah. I'm filled with anxiety in everything I do. I'm 46 years old, and to this day, I'm filled with anxiety. But for some reason, it just felt right to say yes. And so I say yes, and on our first date, we end up at her ex-boyfriend's house. And at some point during the night, I walk into the kitchen, and she's kissing her ex-boyfriend, and I'm like, clearly, this is not a date. And so it was fine. It really wasn't a date. But we were hanging out, and throughout the night, we did what 20-year-olds do. We looked for beer or people to buy us beer, and we looked for places to hang out. And at the end of the night, after we were unsuccessful or moderately successful, we sat in the parking lot of an apartment and talked until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, it turned out I talked because I'm also slightly manic. And so I just talked and talked and talked, and she just listened. And I'm like, wow, this girl's perfect. And so, but I did. I had this terrible breakup with my on-again, off-again girlfriend from high school. She was who I thought was the love of my life. When I was 16, I was planning on marrying this person and white picket fence and all this other stuff. And by the time we were 18, she was hanging out with her best friend whose boyfriend drove a motorcycle, a sport bike. And you can imagine the type of guy with the leather and, the slicked hair and all this stuff. Well, I didn't have one of those motorcycles. And my girlfriend was hanging out with her girlfriend and his boyfriend. And it turns out this other guy who had a bike. And so she had kind of a fraught relationship with her parents, and she ended up moving in with me in this little postage stamp house for a little bit. But I got really sick of having this girlfriend who would show up at 10 o'clock at night brushing the knots out of her hair because she had been on the back of this sport bike with this other guy. And I'm like, geez, I'm a pushover, right? Back then I was 165 pounds and I had hair, so I was a little bit of a discount Matt Damon, but you got to really stretch the imagination here. Anyway, so this woman, finally I got up the courage to kick her out and say, "You're gone." And this is just about the same time I met Mindy. And I had been hanging out with another girl. We were in this film class together, and we thought we were smart and sophisticated, and of course, we were just idealists in college. Well, she and I start hanging out, and pretty soon it's me and her boyfriend hanging out, and then pretty soon I'm meeting parents. And then one day starts making advances at me, and I'm like, what is going on here? And she eventually told me, she's like, my boyfriend is really religious. He doesn't want to have sex. I want to have sex. I want you to have sex with me. And I'm like, you will be so disappointed. I am not having sex with you. And this is true. It's a true story. So anyway, back to my girlfriend of 5 months in the bathroom. The first time Mindy and I had sex, I had no anxiety. I mean, I'm the only 19-year-old who wasn't horny, who was just filled with performance anxiety. My ex-girlfriend, the one who was terrible to me, one time said, "Are you sure you know how this works?" And yes, I know how this works. Like, I just didn't want to explain to her that I'm also terrified right now. But with Mindy, we were at my parents' lake house, and they had this boathouse that was down by the shore. And I remember it was in the morning, and the sun was coming up through the windows, and it was so natural, and I felt so just good to be with this person, and I knew that this was somebody that I needed to be in my life, and I couldn't believe she was willing to sleep with me. And so a couple months go by, and she's moving from one birth control to another birth control, and she says, I have to wait a full cycle, and then it'll be effective. I said, no problem. I know women's cycles exactly right. I had no clue what a woman's cycle was, but I was 20 and I was horny. And so, again, back here we are. I'm standing outside of the bathroom in this cruddy house in this cruddy neighborhood in North Grand Forks, right off the railroad tracks, terrified, but also certain that this is the person that I'm supposed to be with. And she comes out of the bathroom and says, it's positive. And it was funny because she said, if it's not positive, can we get a dog? We've had dogs. But I remember I grabbed her hand, I hugged her, and we went outside and went for a walk. It was May, and the sun was shining, and we were holding hands as we're walking down 3rd Street, and the sun felt like it was shining for us, and I could feel like this being in between our hands as we walked down. And I remember the smell of blooming lilacs just overwhelming us as we walked down the street, knowing that it was all going to be okay. And it's been 26 years, and my wife back there has survived 26 years with me. So that's my story.